More than 55 years after a nuclear submarine built at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard sank during deep diving tests off the New England coast, the crew of the USS Thresher will soon have a memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. Imagine a submarine so advanced, so cutting-edge that the U.S. Navy proudly declared it nearly unsinkable, a nuclear-powered predator designed to stalk the oceans in silence, strike without warning, and give America a decisive edge in the Cold War. That was the USS Thresher, pride of the fleet and technological marvel of her time. But on April 10, 1963, during what should have been a routine deep dive test off Cape Cod, the Thresher vanished. No distress call, no SOS, just silence. Hours later, debris floated to the surface. Twisted metal insulation, fragments that confirmed the unthinkable. The Navy's most advanced submarine had imploded beneath the sea, taking all 129 souls aboard to a crushing instantaneous death. For decades, what really happened that morning remained buried in secrecy, locked behind classified files and half-answers. The official line pointed to probable mechanical failure, but that explanation never satisfied families, engineers, or historians. The truth was darker, deeper, and far more disturbing because the Thresher wasn't simply lost to the cruelty of the ocean. She was lost to a system riddled with flaws, technical, cultural, and political. A vessel built to represent American strength became instead a ghostly reminder of how ambition, without accountability, can turn fatal. And now, thanks to newly released documents, breakthroughs in underwater exploration, and relentless pressure from researchers, we finally know the full story. The mystery of the Thresher has been solved, and it's worse than anyone imagined. To understand why the sinking of the Thresher mattered so much, you have to step back into the early 1960s. The Cold War wasn't just about missiles and moon landings. It was about who controlled the oceans. Nuclear submarines were the ultimate shadow weapons. They could slide beneath the waves undetected, carrying enough firepower to level whole cities or hunt enemy vessels with silent precision. The USS Thresher was the Navy's answer to that race for dominance. Commissioned in 1961, she was a lead boat of a brand new class of fast attack submarines, each one designed to outclass anything the Soviets could build. At 278 feet long, powered by an S-5W nuclear reactor, and fitted with the most advanced sonar systems of her era, Thresher was more than just a ship. She was a statement. America could build submarines that were stronger, faster, and deadlier than anyone else's. She wasn't just built for offense. Her design promised greater safety, too. The Navy bragged about her improved hull strength, cutting-edge technology, and advanced systems. To the outside world, she was nearly invincible. Sailors who served aboard her felt pride. Families trusted the Navy's assurances. The Thresher was supposed to represent progress, security, and American superiority. But beneath that glossy image, cracks were already forming. The rush to outpace the Soviets meant corners were cut, warnings were ignored, and engineering standards weren't as airtight as they should have been. Still, none of that was visible in 1963, when the Thresher prepared for a routine set of sea trials. For the Navy, it was just another test, another chance to show off what their star submarine could do. For the 129 men aboard, it was just another day at sea. No one knew they were heading straight into disaster. The morning of April 10th began calmly enough. Off the coast of Cape Cod, the Thresher slipped beneath the waves, shadowed at the surface by the submarine rescue ship Skylark. The plan was straightforward. Take the sub on a deep dive test, push her closer to her limits, and prove her systems worked flawlessly. At first, everything seemed routine. Reports from the Thresher to the Skylark came through steady and clear as the submarine descended past 400 feet, then 800, then deeper still. But as she passed 1,000 feet, something changed. The crew radioed a vague report of minor difficulties, then silence. On the surface, the Skylark's crew tried desperately to reestablish contact. They sent coded signals, pinged sonar, called again and again. Nothing. Minutes turned to hours. Then faint noises were picked up underwater. Sharp, unnatural sounds followed by nothing but empty static. Hope lingered at first. Maybe it was just a radio failure. Maybe the Thresher would surface late, but intact. But that hope was shattered when debris began floating up to the waves. jagged shards of metal, insulation, pieces unmistakably from the submarine. The awful truth settled in. The Navy's proudest vessel had been crushed by the sea. All 129 men aboard were gone in an instant. 16 officers, 96 enlisted sailors, 17 civilian engineers and technicians who had come along to observe the test, husbands, sons, fathers, young men barely out of training. Their loss was the deadliest submarine disaster in U.S. history. The shock rippled across the nation. The Navy was devastated. The families left in grief and confusion. How could a submarine built to be stronger and safer than any before vanish so completely without warning? From that day forward, the name Thresher became a ghost story in the Navy, a reminder how unforgiving the deep sea can be and how quickly pride can collapse into tragedy. In the wake of the Thresher disaster, the official response from the U.S. Navy was measured, almost too measured. News outlets were flooded with the tragic details, but the Navy was tight-lipped, offering only vague explanations. The first public statement labeled the loss a mechanical failure, without elaborating further. There was no mention of what had caused the failure or whether there were warning signs leading up to it. For the families of the victims and for the naval officers investigating the incident, the silence was maddening. How could an advanced vessel like the Thresher, the most cutting-edge nuclear submarine in the fleet, simply collapse without warning? The official story revolved around what was apparently a random mechanical failure, probably a rupture of a pipe or some sudden flooding event. And yet, this never fully satisfied anyone who had paid the remotest attention. It simply didn't make sense. How could the Thresher, so pre-launch tested, have succumbed so easily to such a terrible breakdown? Speculation began inside military circles. Could the source of this be found in the Thresher's design itself? Was there a constructional flaw in the vessel that had gone unnoticed? A few people thought that failure within the high-pressure seawater piping system, the braze joints, triggered a chain reaction of failures. This was a very salient point, and yet the Navy refused to acknowledge this in their reports. Early theories, however, were not able to gain a foothold because of the secrecy of the Navy and the very limited availability of information. The mystery was to last for decades to come, leaving behind only a few surviving theories about what had happened beneath the waves. Indeed, it would take several decades before the Thresher's true fate finally began to take shape, owing to technological gains and relentless pressure from those obsessed with uncovering the truth. That breakthrough came during the 1980s when the U.S. Navy commissioned the services of renowned oceanographer Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man who would later find the wreck of the Titanic, to locate and document the wreckage of the Thresher and another lost submarine called USS Scorpion. Ballard's expedition was trailblazing. In 1985, using deep-sea submersibles and remotely operated vehicles, Ballard and his crew located the wreckage of the Thresher resting 8,400 feet beneath the surface, about 220 miles east of Cape Cod. What they saw was both shocking and heartbreaking. The Thresher had been torn apart. Its hull had fractured and crumpled under the extreme pressure of the deep ocean. The force of the implosion in which the submarine had gone down was so violent that vast swathes of the sub had been vaporized and left nothing behind but shattered pieces. Haunting and devastating images, these were, but they did not provide the answer as to why the Thresher had imploded in the first place. The wreckage of the Thresher was a grim reminder that even a vessel built to withstand unimaginable depths could be torn apart in a split second. But still, the critical details of why behind the tragedy remained elusive. Was it just bad luck, a freak accident? It wasn't until 2019, nearly 60 years after the Thresher sank, that more crucial pieces of the puzzle began to surface. Thanks to years of legal battles, public pressure, and tireless work on the part of those seeking the truth, the U.S. Navy began to declassify hundreds of pages of documents that had been locked up for decades. These included internal memos, engineering assessments, and testimony from the inquiry into the Thresher disaster. What they showed was stunning. The submarine had been doomed from the start. These revelations started to paint a much clearer picture of the tragic events that unfolded that fateful day in 1963. But the story was far from over. As the newly declassified documents were combed through, a disturbing pattern started to emerge. The Thresher wasn't lost because of a single isolated failure. It was a cascade of interconnected problems, many of which had been identified before the sub ever set sail. The Thresher had been dogged by serious design flaws, and a culture of rushing to meet Cold War demands had buried these concerns. One of the most glaring issues was with the submarine's high-pressure seawater piping system. More specifically, the silver brazed joints used to connect the pipes represented a significant vulnerability. Unlike traditional welding, silver brazing entails joining materials with a silver-based alloy at high temperatures. While the technique was common in many industries, it turned out to be highly unreliable under the extreme pressures encountered at the depths the Thresher was designed to reach. In the months before the test dive, engineers had uncovered that many of these brazed joints were prone to failure. More than 14% of similar joints had failed during testing on other submarines, yet the Thresher was allowed to proceed despite those issues. By properly welding or reinforcing the joints, it would have significantly reduced the chances of rupture. However, due to the pressures of production and the Navy's rush to get the sub into service, this problem persisted right to the catastrophic implosion that took 129 lives and left a permanent scar in naval history.